So that's actually where the nightmare started, because a few days after we arrived there, I think it was a few days after we arrived there, I ended up getting really sick. So at first I didn't know what it was. At first I just felt like I felt like I was getting a cold, and it just got progressively worse. I started getting fever really high. Well, I got the fever first, and then I thought, okay, maybe I have a little bit of fever, but the fever started getting really, really high fever. I started getting body aches everywhere. Like my entire body felt like it was hurting or like it was breaking apart. It just was so painful. Like your whole body, like you couldn't even really move very much because it just was so painful. So I thought, wow, this is like a really strong cold, And then I also started vomiting. So I thought, well, this is weird, because usually with cold I don't get vomiting. And so I started vomiting. I could not keep any food down. And this got progressively worse over a course of a few days. I had no energy at all, that I just was sleeping all day basically, or trying to sleep, because we were staying in this little cabin that was like right on the ocean. It was this cute little cabin, but again, sometimes there'd be no power, so there was no aircon and not even a fan that was moving the air. And since I had such a high fever, I was like sweating so much. So I was like in this cramped little room, sweating like crazy, feeling just absolutely terrible. Like I've never felt that bad just from a cold. I was not able to keep any food down at all. I was drinking a lot. I was drinking tea and water and all that, but I just wasn't able to keep any of the food down. As soon as I ate something, I would just feel nauseous and throw it up. And then I started getting this super weird rash like all over my body, that was super itchy. And I was like, okay, this is something totally different, because these symptoms to me didn't make sense. And at that point, we started getting kind of scared, because I didn't know what was happening to me. I was taking malaria pills, so I didn't think it was going to be malaria. And we'd also slept under a mosquito net all the time, and we were always wearing bug spray. I would spray it on every day, like several times. So I was always smelling like mosquito repellent. So we had no idea what it was. I couldn't even really talk to anyone anymore. And I wasn't even going out for food and stuff. I was just seriously in that hut for days, suffering. So I know I'm laughing about it now, but it really was not funny at all. It was scary. So there was no English speaking or like Western kind of doctor there. And we said, well, who cares? Let's just go to any doctor. Is better than no doctor. So there was a little clinic kind of near to the town, but not really. So we had to organize transportation to get to this little clinic. So we went to the clinic, and it was just very, very rudimentary. I mean, you have to imagine that in a city like Jakarta, you can get top-notch treatment in a very, modern hospital. And then if you're in a place like where we were, totally rural, in the middle of frickin' nowhere, with very limited like development. The road system was not complete. There was pretty much no infrastructure at all there. Very spotty, even cell phone interception. The treatment, obviously, you're going to get there is totally different. So we went to this clinic. We could not speak to anyone there. They did not speak English a word. So we couldn't even really communicate. I couldn't talk to the doctor. I could not even explain to him what my symptoms were. And, there was one doctor for like all the local people. So this guy was totally not even like, he didn't even really examine me. I went into the examination room, which was freezing cold. I was like, I had this really high fever, and the place was like blasting air conditioning. So it was freezing. And then he just like, inspected my tongue and prodded around here a bit with his stethoscope. And then he's like, oh yeah, I'll do a blood test. And they just tested for malaria. And I was pretty sure it wasn't going to be malaria because we'd taken the prophylactics and stuff. So the guy didn't even really give me an examination. He was just not a good doctor, because had he seen like really this rash all over my body, he should have been thinking, well, it's probably something else. And, it ended up being dengue fever, which I'll explain to you how we found that out. So this disease, dengue fever, is very common there. So this doctor should have known that it was dengue fever, but he didn't even really examine me. And so he ended up prescribing all these pills. I had no idea what they were, because he couldn't speak to me in English, so I just knew I was taking like all these pills, which again were later coming up because I was throwing up and stuff, so I couldn't even really keep the medicine down, and it was just like tons of pills that I had to take, which I didn't even know what they were. For us at that point, it was like, okay, this isn't gonna work, you know, I can't just be so sick in the middle of freaking nowhere, not without knowing what I had, no access to real medical help. We tried to call our insurance company from there. We had no cell phone reception. There was no phone at the hotel, at the guest house we were staying at. So we were seriously like in the middle of nowhere. We were seriously stranded there. And it's such a terrible feeling when you're so used to living in the Western world, and if you're sick, you go to the doctor, you go to the hospital and stuff, and immediately getting help. And there we were seriously like at the end of the world, in a beautiful place, you know, like absolutely lovely environment, but when you're that sick, and it's so scary, you know, because you have no one really there to help you. And I'm so glad that I wasn't there by myself, that I was not traveling by myself, because I don't know what I would have done. Like I would have been completely incapacitated. So we had no way to contact anyone at home. Said to ourselves, well, this, you know, we have to do something. We have to take action because our health is, you know, the most important thing. If I had died there or something, that, you know, can you imagine? We decided we had to get to a proper hospital. We had to get proper medical care for me. And what we did is we decided, you know what, we have to go to Jakarta, because that's like the only place that we knew where we would be able to get a good medical treatment, because I don't know this country. I don't know if there's going to be a good doctor in the next town. I had no idea. We couldn't talk to people there very well, so we had to just go by our own instincts, and our instinct was telling us, well, go to Jakarta, you'll be able to go into like a Western style hospital. So that's what we did. We decided to end our trip early because of my health, and because it was at that point so acute that we knew we had to do something. We had to take action. We couldn't have just waited there, and like I would have just gotten sicker and sicker and have no one really be able to help me there. So we ended up flying to Ambon first, and that in itself was a nightmare because I was so weak on the day that I had to travel. So I could barely even like carry my backpack, and my boyfriend really had to help me because I was so weak at that point. We got to the airport. It was like we had to leave at like 4 o'clock in the morning because it was like some insanely early flight, because we wanted to from Ambon catch the connecting flight to Jakarta right away. So we finally arrived in Ambon. I'm like totally drained at this point. I had just, as soon as I got to the airport, I went outside and puked. Horrible, just horrible experience. In Ambon, we're like, okay, we gotta get our luggage and get onto the connecting flight, the next flight that's going to Jakarta. We went to pick up our luggage, and my luggage wasn't there. Or one bag was there and one hadn't arrived. So we went to the luggage place, and first we had to find another guy who speaks English. It was like, at that point, it's like, it drives you insane. It's like you're at a freaking airport and no one speaks English. Like and especially when you're in a kind of emergency situation, and it's like, you don't have all the time in the world. It is so frustrating to not be able to communicate. You know, I know I'm in a foreign country, but it's like you're at the airport. You would expect there to at least find somebody who speaks English. So we first had to find someone who speaks English, and then we found this guy who speaks a little bit. They told us that, oh, you know, they packed the airplane really badly, so they ended up leaving half the luggage back in Tual. We're like, what the fuck, man? Seriously, like they just didn't pack the airplane correctly, so they left like half the luggage there. And we're like, we need our luggage. We have to go to Jakarta. They're like, oh yeah, well, it's gonna be arriving sometime today. Come back in 6 hours. You know, I guess we could have risked just not having our stuff, but we had valuables in there and stuff. We were actually seriously considering just keeping on going and just throwing, like, just, you know, like that's a loss, and we're never gonna see that backpack again. You know, in these countries, it's like things there are just not very well organized, or, you know, the airplane ran out of fuel, so the airplane just doesn't fly, and like just weird stuff happens there that doesn't happen in our world, in our existence. So, well, at least not here in Switzerland, it doesn't. So at that point, if you're feeling ill and you're in an emergency situation, it's not funny anymore. That might be funny when you have all the time in the world and that's kind of part of it, but when you're like, you really need to get somewhere because of your health, then it becomes extremely aggravating. So we were at the airport waiting around for about 6 or 7 hours, and this airport didn't have any waiting lounges with aircon and stuff. So I was still feeling horrible at that point. I slept on the ground that was covered in dirt because I seriously could not just stand up for that whole time. So I was just sleeping on the dirty ground, trying to get some rest. And then finally our luggage came. We got on the next flight to Jakarta, and then as soon as we were in Jakarta, we booked into like a nice hotel. Like I just didn't want to stay at a cheap little bungalow anymore. Because I was feeling so ill, I wanted like the comforts of a nice Western style bathroom and like my own shower and comfortable bed and everything. That the following day, immediately I went to a hospital. So, and at that point I was in contact with my medical insurance, like my travel insurance company, because I'm covered for like medical emergencies, especially for this exact thing. You know, if you're going on travels in another country and you have an emergency, is that you're covered for, you know, costs, and they'll help you and stuff. So they were like, yeah, you have to go to a doctor to get medically certified that you have something. So I was like, yeah, obviously I'm going to go to the hospital because I'm feeling so horrible. And I still didn't even know what I had. So I went to this hospital in Jakarta, and it was a great hospital, very clean. Everyone spoke English. The doctor that examined me, I think it was a woman. I think she was like from Singapore or Hong Kong or something. Finally, I was able to talk to a doctor and explain what had happened, and I finally felt like I was getting medical treatment. They were actually going to figure out what was wrong with me. And at that point I was still feeling really bad, obviously. I still had fever, I was still throwing up, and so she did some tests, and right away she just took one look at me with this rash and she was like, oh yeah, you probably have dengue fever. So she knew right away what it was. We're not familiar with this disease in the West, so that's why I wasn't able to identify it. So she did some blood tests, and yeah, it confirmed that I did have dengue fever, and I was like shocked because dengue fever is transmitted through mosquitoes. And kind of like malaria is transmitted through mosquitoes, and we had taken every precaution under the book. We'd taken malaria tablets. We were sleeping under mosquito nets. We were wearing long clothing at night. I was spraying myself with that insecticide stuff like several times a day to make sure that I was protected. And still, like, one nasty ass mosquitoes must have bitten me that had the dengue fever virus. And that one fucker infected me. At that point, I knew we'd made the right decision to go back to Jakarta. You know, if I had not gotten treated at that point, it would have gotten worse and worse and worse. And it can be life-threatening if you don't get it treated. So if we had stayed there, and if we had just like waited it out, it could have, like, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, I have to go home I need to go home, because there was no way that I was going to recuperate there. At that point, I was like, okay, I need to go home. I need to recuperate. My body is just completely wrecked. You know, I had no energy. And the other issue that I had was the food issue. I was still like throwing up, so I wasn't able to keep the food down. And we couldn't find really Western food there. So I like Asian food, but when you're feeling crappy, you don't want to be eating rice and curry and, like, you know, you don't want to be eating these kind of, for us, weird food that you're not used to. That, like, you probably want like chicken noodle soup and like you know, those kind of things that you're used to eating when you're sick. Yeah, it was hard. It was really hard for me. I don't know. I know that's like a risk that you take when you go to a tropical country or you go to a place that's not very developed. Like, you know, if you go to a holiday in New York, obviously you're not going to have the same risks as if you go on holiday to some very remote place in Indonesia. And I know that those are always part of the risks that you go, but of course you try to take all the precautions that you can, but there is always a risk factor. And I was just incredibly unlucky because we did take all the precautions that you could. There's no vaccination against dengue fever, so there really wasn't anything else I could have done to prevent it. So yeah, our insurance company basically said, well, you know what, we're not going to help you, basically. I've never felt so enraged as when I was there in Indonesia, talking to this insurance company that I've paid every year. I pay them loads of money, you know, to insure me. I've never had to use it before. I've never had to like go you know, and be rescued from someplace. And there I am, seriously in the middle of shit, like feeling like shit, wanting to go home, wanting nothing more than to go home, and being like in the comfort of my home and being able to recover my health. And they just basically said, go screw yourself, we're not going to help you. They said, no, you know what, dengue fever, it's not such an important thing, like you can just stay there and recover. I mean, it just, to me, was mind-boggling. I just don't understand it. If the insurance company is KPT Schweiz, and I'm saying that because you know, I think they do have a responsibility towards their customers, and like, it's not like I was just, you know, oh, I'd want to go home and I wasn't having fun, so let's take advantage of it and let's pretend I'm sick and go home. I was seriously ill. I just felt so alone. I felt like this company that I had paid to help me was just basically giving me the finger. Sorry, I'm not giving you guys the finger, but that's how I felt like they were treating me. So we said, you know what? Fuck you guys. On my iPhone, I went onto like a flight website and tried to find like the cheapest flight. It went over Doha. So that's in Qatar. We're like, okay, you know what? Let's take the first flight we can home. We booked a one-way ticket like for the next day. And it ended up costing us like $1,600 to fly home, and I knew that was like a lot of money because we'd already bought a return flight, but we couldn't change our return flight. It was like a ticket that you couldn't change. Usually with economy seat tickets, you can't change them after you've purchased it. That's why we contacted the insurance company to like help us to find a flight and stuff. They just didn't give a shit. So we ended up booking our own flight, and we flew over Doha. Flight was like such a weird time that we ended up having a 9-hour layover in Doha, Qatar. And it was in the middle of the night. So we arrived at like midnight, and our connecting flight to Zurich, Switzerland, wasn't until the next morning at like 9 o'clock. So we were at the airport for the whole night. I was exhausted at this point, still from being ill. And there was nowhere to sleep at the airport. Finally, it was like 9 o'clock, and I can't even express to you at that point how happy I was just to be on the way home, because I knew that this nightmare was about to end, because I was going to be at home in Switzerland, in like my country, where I'm going to get proper medical treatment and like all that. And I just knew that was coming, but I think the trip home was like 40 hours or something. So it was extremely draining. I ended up getting sick again, because probably my immune system was just completely a zero at that point. I must have caught a flu virus at the airport, because as soon as I boarded the plane to Zurich, I started feeling ill. And not just dengue fever ill, but I started getting like body chills again, but a different kind of body chills, so I knew I was getting the flu. And as soon as we then arrived in Switzerland and I got home, oh my god, I cannot tell you. Finally arriving in Switzerland, I don't think I've ever been that relieved and that happy to be home. It's always nice to come home after a long trip and like be at home, but I cannot tell you what it feels like to come home after you've had like such a terrible experience in another country, when you're, especially to do with your health. And at that point I was just like ready to kiss the ground. And so we finally got home, and then for the next 2 or probably 3 weeks I was sick in bed. So I seriously could not even really get out of bed, and my boyfriend ended up getting really sick too. So I basically became sick sometime middle of December and wasn't really on the way until recovery until mid-January. So then finally I was on the way to recovery. Then another process started, because I'd had good experience in Indonesia. I don't want to say the whole trip was bad, but just because of everything that happened at the end, I was like, wow, this trip sucked. It wasn't funny. And then it wasn't even over by that time, because then I had a legal dispute now with my insurance company, because I just felt like they should pay for that. Like that's what I'm freaking paying you for all these years, to insure me and to like help me in an instance like of an emergency, like a medical emergency. And then when push comes to shove, they didn't help me. The dispute started, and I disputed their decision. So I went like all the way up the ladder to try and get this resolved. After multiple letters, I was writing back and forth, and after that, so it was another very stressful process. It wasn't like I just contacted them once. I had to write like 3 letters to them, to different people in different departments and stuff. And all this, you know, I had to send in all the medical certification and everything. And so after that, they decided, okay, they're going to pay for the flight home. And of course the medical stuff too, but the medical costs weren't very much, because actually it's really cheap to go to the doctor in countries. I think at the hospital bill was like $40. If you go to the hospital, I had to once go to the hospital here, it was like over $1,000. And they never really said their reasoning for, you know, why they didn't want to pay for it. I think they just totally underestimated how ill I really was. I mean, it wasn't just like a little bit of, ooh, I'm not feeling good. It was like I was fucking ill. You know, we'd planned to go on all these dive expeditions and stuff like that. And we did go on a dive trip on the Banda Islands. And we planned to go on more dive trips, and you know, I wasn't able to do that, obviously. The way that they were writing was like, oh, well, you know, you can just continue on now with your vacation. It's not such a big deal. And I just felt like I wasn't being taken seriously at all. So I'm glad that they did decide to, you know, retract their decision, and now they're going to pay for the flight home. I still don't have the money yet in my bank account, so I'm going to make sure that I get that. I don't know if I'm going to now cancel my insurance policy with them, because I feel like, yes, they did pay for it in the end, but to reach that point took so much effort on my behalf. It really shouldn't be like that. And they didn't help us when we were in Indonesia, and I could have used their help. Oh, I got the phone bill having to call, you have to call their hotline. So there was no like toll-free number. My phone bill was over $300. Which they also did not pay. So we had to pay for that. Oh, and the really hilarious part is, well, not hilarious, but really upsetting, is now all my hair is falling out. It started like about a week ago, but I was in the shower and I noticed like clumps of hair were coming out. Not just like the usual, but like 3 or 4 times as much as normal. And it was just continuing on for like a week. And I was like, wow, what the hell is going on? I went to the doctor and I thought maybe it's some kind of deficiency, you know, maybe like iron deficiency, because I've had an iron deficiency in the past. And so I went to the doctor, I did all medical checkup and stuff, and he said that everything was fine. He said I'm really healthy, like my pulse rate was really good. Oh, I'm in the athletic pulse rate now. So I'm very happy about that. So that was all fine. He couldn't find anything. And he's like, oh, well, have you been ill? And I was like, oh, yeah, I was ill. I had dengue fever in December. And I explained to him everything that happened and blah, blah. And I told him all that. This is like my general practitioner doctor. And so he was like, oh, that's probably it. Because if you have a grave illness, or some women get it after postpartum, so after they get pregnant, after they deliver a child, it's almost like a shock to your system, because your body is used to dealing with illnesses and sickness and stuff, but something really, really intense like that can be a shock, and it can cause your hair to go into a stage known as telogen effluvium. So I went onto Google after the appointment, and I just looked up like after effects of dengue fever and stuff, and a lot of people have it. It happens about 2 or 3 months after your dengue fever outburst, so you start losing hair. And I don't know if I can show you now, because I've already brushed my hair today, but it's like you go through your hair and it's like, I don't even know if you can see that, but I've already got like tons of hair here in my hands, just going, like just running my hands through my hair like this. So it just means that the hair is falling out, because it seems to think that the growth stage is complete, and it's you know, when I brush my hair in the morning or after a shower, it just I've got clumps of hair coming out. So I'm just, you know, I'm worried that it's not going to stop for a while. Sorry about that, guys, but seriously, it's hard to deal with, because it's like, especially for a woman, you know, you don't want to be going bald. And I've already noticed, like here on the front, you know, I cut bangs recently and they look really thin, and I'm like, well, they didn't look like that when I cut them. I have to vacuum now like every 2 days or something, because there's so much hair lying around our apartment. And if I brush my hair, when I brush my hair, I try to minimize now the brushing, because each time I brush it, it's just like my hairbrush, it's just full of hair. And it's scary. My doctor said that it'll stop naturally and the hair grows back, but you know, look how long my hair is. Like, it's going to, like, this hair is probably 10 years of growth, if not more. I know it's like all vanity and stuff, and I know that it's like, it's not the end of the world, the hair is going to grow back, but you know, it's just annoying that this crap happen to me. And I know worse things can happen to people. I know people get diseases and like die, and but it's just not nice. I just wish I'd never gone to Indonesia, honestly, because like the good parts were nice. You know, the country's beautiful. The negative experiences that I had are so long lasting, like the whole fact that my hair is now falling out, and you know, the whole stress that I had with my insurance company, and feeling like having dengue fever and going through that nightmare. It's just, it wasn't worth it, to be honest. And I know, like I said before, it's a risk when you go to this country. If you want to be safe and you want to be sure nothing happens, well, you can't be 100% safe anywhere, but you know, if you want to live in a luxurious place and have all that, then obviously don't go to a place like Eastern Indonesia. So I don't want to turn people off going to countries like that. You know, I spent a year in Asia and never really had much happen to me. I had some diarrhea, but that's normal. But nothing grave happened to me. And so I don't want to turn people off going traveling, but just realize that going to these underdeveloped places, and they really are underdeveloped, you know, there's going to be some risks that are part of it. So it just depends if you want to take that risk. The risk is small, but you know, it can happen. It can happen to anyone. I hope you guys enjoyed the story, and that's, I guess, hopefully you guys can understand now why I didn't really want to do a video on it for so long. It's just, that's life. I definitely have a newfound appreciation. Well, I've always had appreciation and knowledge on that, how lucky I am to live in the country that I do. But I definitely, when I came back from Indonesia and I was like so ill and I was here, I just was like, wow, my God, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky to live here. And like, you know, just in those countries, people die of diseases because they can't get medical help, or they don't have the money to do so. And here it was just like, oh, let's hop on a flight and go home to Switzerland and then I'm fine. You know, most people in the world don't have that option. So I definitely don't take that for granted at all. So yeah, anyway, on that note, I wish you guys much health, because I just realized how important it is to be, you know, to have that. So if you've ever gotten sick in a foreign country, let me know in the bottom what happened. If you want to share your story, let's kind of, you know, grow from this or learn from this, and just, or maybe laugh at our own misfortune. And I will see you guys very soon. Bye.